Catalonia and Catalans, what do you know about them? I think most people don't know much, if only because there isn't a separate country like that. Mention Barcelona, the historical center here, and everyone recognizes it, especially football fans. Catalonia is also a land with a rich cultural heritage, a complex history, and an uncertain future. Nowadays, Catalonia is not just a region in the northeast of Spain, but also the home of a distinct people, more than 7 million Catalans, who are different from both the Spanish and their French neighbors. Catalonia is a place where the unique Catalan language is spoken, and a unique culture exists, which the Spanish authorities tried to destroy for hundreds of years, but without success. Catalonia is a vivid example of how, even with an ancient statehood, you can eventually lose everything, but later be reborn and become an economic and cultural giant on a European scale. Today we will take a detailed look at the history of Catalonia and the features of its development. I will talk about the formation of Catalan identity, and we will also draw some parallels with events from today's history that are well known to us. We will also analyze the current status of Catalonia and try to forecast the situation for the near future. Briefly, I'm Semyon, and I declare the How Did They Live post section open. Let's begin. The ancient history of Catalonia. Ethnogenesis, the origin and development of a people, and the formation of statehood are often debated in scientific circles and sometimes used for propaganda. Remember the debates over whether the Slavs, Varangians or Khazars mainly contributed to forming the state of Rus? Or recall those Nazi beliefs that claimed Germans preserved the purity and heritage of the ancient Aryan tribes. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to determine the exact time and circumstances of the formation of the Catalans as a separate people. It is certain that the ancestors of the Catalans were ancient Iberian tribes who settled in eastern and southeastern Iberian Peninsula in the first millennium before Christ. Later, they mixed with incoming Celtic tribes who migrated from the territory of modern-day France, and later still, they were periodically visited by Phoenician, Greek, and Carthaginian colonists. Let's examine the latter in more detail. By the mid-3rd century before Christ, the once powerful maritime state of Carthage, preparing for a deadly clash with rival Rome, brought Catalonia under its control. And it was the Carthaginians who founded Barcelona, turning it into an important stronghold on the territory of the Iberian Peninsula. According to the most common version, the settlement got its name in honor of Hamilcar Barca, the biological father of Hannibal, Rome's sworn enemy. As you know, Rome won this conflict, and Catalonia remained part of the Roman province of Tarraconensis for over 600 years. Thanks to its convenient geographical location and warm maritime climate, this region developed rapidly, and Barcelona, or as it was then called Barcino, became a major seaport. The great migration of peoples and the fall of the Western Roman Empire turned everything upside down. Catalonia, like most of the Iberian Peninsula, was seized by the warlike Visigothic tribes, and thus the barbarian state, the Kingdom of the Visigoths, emerged. The formation of Catalan statehood, strangely enough, is connected to the Arab invasion of Europe. The fact is, less than 100 years had passed since the day the Prophet Muhammad founded a new world religion. The warlike Arabs, then known as Moors, seized the Middle East, Asia Minor, and North Africa. In 711, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and soon conquered the entire Iberian Peninsula. The kingdom of the Visigoths faded into history, but the Moors did not stop there and continued to advance deeper into the continent. In fact, the European continent was facing a real threat of Islamization. In 732, at the Battle of Poitiers, Karl Martel's Frankish army decisively defeated the Arabs, halting their advance across Europe. This began the Christians' effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from the Arabs. This process went down in history as the Reconquista and lasted for almost 800 years, and thanks to the Reconquista, the first state formation appeared on the territory of Catalonia. The county of Barcelona emerged in 801 after Frankish Emperor Karl the Great's successful campaigns liberated the peninsula's northeast from the Arabs. There arose a need to create a stronghold to maintain control over the liberated territories and to advance further. and the most ideal option for these purposes turned out to be Barcelona and the territories adjacent to it. At first, the county of Barcelona was not sovereign. For nearly 2 centuries, it was a vassal of the Frankish Empire. Most importantly, this state was the first Christian state on the Iberian Peninsula during the Reconquista. Later, as the Arabs were further expelled, the kingdoms of Navarre, Castile, Leon, Aragon, and the county of Portugal emerged, but Barcelona came first. This fact is one of the reasons why many Catalans today strive to separate from Spain. In ancient times, the state traditions were that Catalan statehood existed long before the emergence of the Spanish one, and that the county of Barcelona flourished several centuries before the unification of Spain into a single state. And this situation is very reminiscent of the centuries-old dispute over the supremacy of Moscow or Kiev. Kiev predates Moscow by nearly 700 years. Kiev's statehood began when Moscow's area was just swamps, forests, bears, and wolves. But later, due to certain historical circumstances, Moscow subjugated Kiev and held it in its tight grip until 1991. Now it's trying to reverse time. Returning to the formation of Catalonia, it should be noted that the county of Barcelona became a fully independent state in 988 when Hugh Capet became the new king in Paris, and Count Borel too refused to swear allegiance to him, which meant breaking legal ties with France. Alongside political independence, cultural independence was also forming, which would actually become the foundation for the development of the Catalan national identity and the understanding of their difference from both the Spanish and the French. It is no coincidence that the local Catalan language is a peculiar synthesis of Spanish and French with some Italian influences, and that traditional Catalan culture includes elements of both Spanish and French heritage. There is a certain similarity with Ukraine, which for many centuries also found itself at the crossroads of 2 cultures, 2 civilizational spaces, and 2 ways of life, Western and Eastern. Catalonia became part of Spain, and it lost its independence not because of a military defeat, as one might think, but because of a dynastic marriage. Such things were extremely popular in medieval Europe. So, in 1137, the Count of Barcelona named Ramon Berenguer foremarried Petronila of Aragon, the only daughter of the King of Aragon, and their son Alfonso II already held the title of King of Aragon and Count of Barcelona. So, in fact, the 2 states merged. At the same time, Catalonia was a more economically developed state because it had access to the sea, and Barcelona was one of the largest ports in the Western Mediterranean. Not only French and Genoese merchants often visited there, but also Venetians and even Byzantines. However, since Aragon was a kingdom, the union was not entirely equal. After all, in the Middle Ages, these statuses were extremely important. A county was by default inferior to a kingdom. And it turned out that Catalonia was kind of annexed to Aragon. Frankly, the Catalan elite kept many privileges, both linguistic, using Catalan, and judicial, and did not let themselves be offended. The right to judge by their own ancient laws and customs, most importantly, financial ones, preferences in taxation and customs tariffs. The Catalans had the right to their own Cortes, a parliament that protected local nobility interests and prevented Aragonese kings from interfering in regional affairs. In practice, this meant that Catalonia had broad autonomous status within Aragon. Centuries later, a similar event occurred on a larger scale. In 1469, Ferdinand of Aragon married Isabella of Castile, starting Spain's unification, though the term Spain was only used from the early 16th century. Thus, Catalonia became part of the unified Spanish state. At first, the Spanish kings were forced to respect the ancient privileges and customs of Catalonia and its nobility. Gradually, as absolute monarchy developed and Spanish kings, like their French counterparts, gained nearly unlimited power, centralization took hold. This strengthened central authority, reduced local elites' power, unified the judicial system, eliminated old privileges, including financial, and promoted widespread use of Spanish language and culture. Major conflicts between the Spanish kings and Catalan aristocracy began in the late 16th century. After losing resources in a disastrous war with England, King Philip II tried to refill the treasury by removing several privileges that let Catalonia lower its taxes. At first, the local nobility managed to thwart the king's ambitions, but the contradictions continued to grow. At the same time, the Spanish language was being de facto introduced as the only language of the center, while Catalan began to be pushed out of official use. Cases were increasingly recorded where members of the Catalan nobility and clergy seeking career advancement in Madrid were forced to switch to the Spanish language. Just like during the times of the Russian Empire and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, when the use of the Ukrainian language was unofficially considered a sign of provincialism and even lack of education, while fluency in Russian automatically opened the way to successfully realizing one's own potential. Abolition of Catalan autonomy. In the middle of the 17th century, the confrontation between Madrid and Barcelona reached such a level of tension that it only needed the slightest spark for everything to explode, and the explosion happened. In 1640, the common people couldn't take it anymore. Catalan peasants spontaneously rose up against the Spanish authorities, so this event went down in history as the Reapers' War. The uprising was triggered by the stationing of regular troops in Catalonia, which was a direct violation of the existing privileges. The lawlessness and looting committed by the Spanish soldiers, combined with yet another increase in levies, quite predictably led to a social explosion. The Catalan nobility quickly took advantage of the situation, as they had long been looking toward France. After all, that country was not foreign to the Catalans, and many local nobles saw it as a lesser evil compared to the Spanish crown. And the timing was just perfect for carrying out these plans. Spain had been at war with France since 1635. In August 1640, the Catalan nobility allied with French King Louis XIII, and by year's end, French troops entered Catalonia. In 1641, the Catalan Cortes deposed the Spanish king as Count of Barcelona and declared the King of France as his successor. Thus, for a short period of time, Catalonia became part of France, but military fortune is a fickle thing. At first, thanks to French support, the Catalans managed to fend off the Spanish. However, in 1648, France was engulfed in a civil war, better known as the Fronde, and Paris could no longer support its new subjects. The war shifted in 1651, when Spanish troops, having recovered from earlier losses, besieged Barcelona. The city surrendered in 1652, but the Catalan aristocracy secured a promise from King Felipe IV to maintain their ancient privileges. This agreement was partially fulfilled. However, the central government's control over the rebellious province was significantly strengthened. And although the Catalan language was not officially banned, its use in official documents was reduced. In short, the Spanish authorities were looking for an opportunity to finally put an end to Catalan autonomy and turn it into an ordinary province of the Spanish kingdom, and such an opportunity appeared half a century later. At the beginning of the 18th century, the so-called War of the Spanish Succession broke out. At that time, two contenders fought for the Spanish throne, Archduke Karl Habsburg and Prince Felipe Bourbon, each supported by different European states. And once again, the Catalans backed the wrong horse by supporting the losing side. As a result, in 1714, Barcelona was once again besieged by Spanish troops and fell after 2 months. This time, the ancient city was looted, and most of the fighters for Catalonia's independence were executed in the most brutal way. September 11, the day Barcelona fell, is still remembered by Catalans as a significant but tragic anniversary of those distant events. After suppressing the rebellion, the new Spanish king, Felipe V, decided to eradicate not only the remnants of Catalonia's political autonomy once and for all, but also Catalan identity itself. He viewed it as the biggest threat to the Spanish crown's unity. For this purpose, in 1716 the so-called Nueva Planta decrees were enacted. Their essence was the final and irreversible elimination of Catalonia's autonomous status, the dissolution of the Catalan Cortes and other local self-government bodies, the abolition of local courts, the replacement of Catalan laws with Spanish ones, and the introduction of a ban on the use of the Catalan language at the official level. From that moment on and for the next 200 years, Catalonia turned into an ordinary Spanish province, governed by royal officials appointed in Madrid, and the local population was subjected to strict and purposeful Spanishization, like Ukrainians who lived under the Russian Empire and Soviet Union. The revival of Catalonia. And yet, despite the bans and restrictions that existed, the Spaniards never fully managed to break the proud Catalans. They managed to preserve their language, culture, and the memory of their glorious past and former greatness. However, for more than 2 centuries, the Spanish authorities continued to maintain the dominance of the Spanish language alone. The Catalan language remained excluded from schools and administration, and Catalan culture was subjected to various forms of discrimination. Information technology. Catalonia's chance for revival came in 1931, when Spain's revolution overthrew the monarchy and proclaimed a republic. The new democratic government allowed the restoration of Catalan self-government bodies, and in 1932 also granted autonomous status. The Catalan language became official alongside Spanish, and it was allowed to be used in educational institutions, the media, and government bodies. However, this Catalan renaissance was very short-lived. In 1936, a bloody civil war broke out in Spain. A group of far-right generals led by Francisco Franco decided to establish a fascist-type dictatorship and overthrow the legitimate government. The Catalans immediately stood up in defense of the republican authorities, fully understanding what awaited them if the Spanish fascists were to win. That's why Catalonia became a key center of resistance against Franco. It's no surprise that the fall of Barcelona in January 1939 was seen by many contemporaries as the inevitable end of the Spanish Republic, which indeed happened 2 months later. Franco's dictatorship was a dark period in Catalonia's history. Many locals suffered political terror, and for years, identifying as Catalan was life-threatening. For example, former Catalan government head Luis Companys was executed. For several decades, Catalans were considered second-class citizens, and for the Franco regime, they were a potentially disloyal element. The Catalan language was completely banned in the public sphere, including education, the media, cinema, and book publishing, and many elements of Catalan culture were censored, and many local names and toponyms were deliberately replaced with their Spanish equivalents. Only the bloody dictator's death in 1975 allowed a new revival. The new democratic constitution of Spain, adopted in 1978, restored the autonomous status of Catalonia and legalized the Catalan language as an official language in this region alongside Spanish. Thus, it can be stated with confidence that the process of restoring Catalan identity has become irreversible. The end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century in the Catalan Republic were marked by further expansion of Catalonia's autonomy, primarily in the economic sphere. Most taxes remained at the disposal of the highest self-government body, of the Catalan Generalitat. This approach, along with major investments in infrastructure and logistics, a favorable business climate, and significant industrial potential, undoubtedly contributed to the rapid economic development of the region. Catalonia accounted for between 20 and 25% of Spain's total gross domestic product in different years. That's why it's no surprise that about 20 years ago, journalists were actively writing about the real Catalan economic miracle. And of course, there's tourism, warm seaside resorts, stunning scenery, and Barcelona in all its glory, which is truly special. The symbol of the city is the Cathedral of the Holy Family, better known worldwide as La Sagrada Familia, and the football club Barcelona. There are few clubs in Europe with more titles. Football can confidently be called the second religion of the Catalans. As a result, every year millions of tourists have visited and continue to visit Catalonia, leaving a significant amount of money there each year. Barcelona hosted the Summer Olympic Games, something that no other Spanish city, including the capital Madrid, has achieved to this day. Overall, in the early 2000s, Catalan society faced a dilemma, whether to remain part of Spain and seek further expansion of autonomy, or to pursue full independence for Catalonia. Meanwhile, many Catalans are still undecided about Catalonia's independence, and their numbers have varied over time. In 2006, a local referendum was held in Catalonia in which almost 3/4 of participants voted for greater autonomy for their region and for the recognition of Catalans as a distinct people. As a result, Catalonia gained more authority in regulating its internal affairs, especially in the tax system, justice, and migration policy. However, for more radical politicians, this was not enough, and in 2009 and 2010, they organized consultative referendums, the results of which, however, were not recognized by the Spanish authorities. But what is important is that for the first time the question of Catalonia's complete secession from Spain was publicly raised. However, all these events pale compared to the heated events of 2017. At that time, things almost escalated to armed confrontation, which could have potentially turned into a full-scale civil war. Since 2014, politicians favoring full independence, not just autonomy, have dominated Catalonia's authorities. Of course, many viewers might have a perfectly reasonable question. Aren't these events connected to what was happening at the same time in Ukraine? That's out of the question, though no direct link between the Catalan radicals and the Putin regime exists. However, it's quite likely that by trampling on international law and violating the principle of inviolability of borders, Moscow actually activated long-standing separatist movements. And not only in Spain did Putin's example become contagious for many. Be that as it may, since 2014, the idea of holding a full-fledged referendum on declaring independence has been actively promoted in Catalonia, not just a poll or a consultation, but a legitimate referendum. This was despite clear opposition from Spanish authorities. The situation became even more tense in 2016 when the Catalan Generalitat was headed by the radical journalist Carles Puigdemont. It became clear to everyone that he definitely wouldn't back down. Catalonia's independence referendum occurred on October 1, 2017, as expected. Before the voting day, he declared such an expression of will illegal, referring to the norms of the current Spanish constitution. As for the results, only 43% of Catalonia's population cast their ballots, which gave the Spanish authorities an additional argument about its illegitimacy. Over 90% of voters backed Catalonia's independence. The situation became even more tense on October 27 when the Catalonian parliament declared the independence of the Catalonian Republic. It lasted only 5 days. The Spanish government immediately dissolved the Catalonian parliament and dismissed the head of Catalonia. At the same time, the region's autonomous status was suspended and direct rule from Madrid was imposed. And on October 31, the Constitutional Court of Spain annulled Catalonia's declaration of independence. So the newly formed state never came into existence. Note the two key facts. First, no country recognized the sovereignty of the Catalan Republic. This put the newly formed state on the same level as such self-proclaimed entities as the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh, and so on. Secondly, neither Dimon the putschist nor his radical supporters were ready to fight for Catalonia's independence and only called on the local population for non-violent resistance. Fortunately, the opposition led to the fact that no blood was shed, and even during rallies and other protests, there were no casualties. What sets them apart from the recent events? The revolution of dignity Catalonia nowadays. What's next? Today? The internal situation in Catalonia can be described very simply: tense stability. The region remained part of Spain, and in the Catalan Generalitat, supporters of the moderate line once again gained the majority. After turning defeat into a coup, Dimon and a few supporters fled abroad and were declared internationally wanted. Today, the failed president of the Catalan Republic is under house arrest in Brussels. The Spanish authorities are demanding his extradition, and it's no surprise, since back home he faces 13 years in prison. Recently, Catalonia's situation has stabilized, with public sentiment turning more pragmatic. The local residents are tired of the political turbulence, which inevitably affects their well-being. Global issues like the coronavirus pandemic, migration crisis, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine have brought Catalans and Spaniards together. Although the region is periodically swept by various protests where, in addition to economic demands, calls for independence resurface, for now they are not mainstream. As for the future of Catalonia, in the coming years, the prospect of full independence for the region is not in sight. The policy of pragmatism will inevitably focus on cultural and economic autonomy rather than achieving immediate independence. However, the latter option should not be ruled out, especially if Spain is engulfed by a large-scale crisis or even a revolution. Then, in the context of the inevitable weakening of central authority, Catalonia will have every chance to gain true sovereignty. That's exactly what Ukraine did back in 1991. Fortunately, Catalonia has everything necessary for full independent development: ancient state traditions, strong economic potential, a clearly defined national identity, and most importantly, hard-working people.